Has anybody had a horrible day? Not necessarily today. Today's Mother's Day, so happy Mother's Day, moms. Happy Mother's Day. But has anybody had a horrible day, just a horrible day in the last week, month, year, life? Okay. Maybe not as bad as these guys. Look at this. Here's number one. This is a barge captain on probably his last day of work. How about this one? She hit reverse instead of drive, so way to go. Dispelling myths everywhere. This guy, you can't see it really well, I'm sorry. His score on Jeopardy right now is negative 89,400. National television score right there, way to go. Way to go, public school education. So I know you guys don't understand this. You're from the South. But in the North where it gets cold, sometimes it freezes. And you never should leave carbonated beverages in your car when that happens. Because things happen. Things happen. Last. I love roller coasters. This might be the worst possible thing that could ever happen to you, though. That would be a horrible day. I can just imagine being that person sitting there and they're just like, hold still, we gotcha. I'm like, wait a second. Are you sure? I'm probably 100 feet in the air, face backwards. You're going to take that harness off. Yeah. Horrible, horrible day. Today we're going to talk about this kind of subject. What happens when everything falls apart? We're going to do it out of the book of Ruth. So if you have your Bibles, go to the book of Ruth. Ruth is in the Old Testament. It goes Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Then there's a book called Joshua, and then there's a book called Judges, and then the 8th book in the Old Testament is called Ruth. The way we get to Ruth is God creates everything in Genesis 1 through 3, and then the flood, and then Abraham pops on the scene, and Abraham is called to a land, and he has a son named Isaac. Isaac has a son named Jacob. Jacob ends up having 12 sons that a couple are adopted through Joseph, and he has 12, and he's named Israel. Jacob and his 12 sons go down into Egypt. They're in Egypt. They grow up there and they multiply. In fact, the Old Testament talks about how fast they multiply. And there's millions of Israelites in Egypt. And then they are made slaves and they're oppressed. Moses is raised in the home of Pharaoh, and he goes off into the desert. He comes back, and he says, very frankly, let my people go. So after 10 plagues, the tribes of Israel are let go from Egypt, from captivity, and they cross the Red Sea, and they're told to go up into the Promised Land. Well, they disobey, and they don't go up into the Promised Land. They run away from what God has told them to do, and so they're forced to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, until all of their mothers and fathers who disobeyed die. That's pleasant. And then Joshua and Caleb, but under Joshua's leadership, the Israelite nation, the Jewish people, cross the Jordan River and take over the Promised Land. They go 31-1 underneath Joshua's leadership. The one loss that they had was because there was some sin in the camp, and it was to a really small city. But after that, they roll through the rest of the rest of the nations, the rest of the people around there, and they take over everything, almost everything. They leave a few pockets of people, a few groups of people who don't follow God, who don't go after God, who worship other gods. And what ends up happening as a result of that is sin just kind of starts to birth up within Israel, and idolatry starts to grow. And as that happens, these people called judges come on the scene. They aren't kings. Don't mistake this. They aren't kings. They're people who rise up after a while, and they put down this idolatry. They put down uprisings. They put down these things, and then after a while, everything goes back to as it was. So if you're thinking through Judges, you might remember a guy named Samson. You might know a lady named Deborah. You might know some of these names, and they've risen up to push things down. And that's the place that this book Ruth is written in. The book Ruth is written in they're in the land of Israel. Israel has moved in, and now the book of Ruth sets up. And you're about to see a few people who have had a pretty horrible day, pretty horrible 10 years. If you have your Bibles, we're in Ruth chapter 1. If you have your Bibles, we're in Ruth chapter 1. We're going to do 5 verses. We're going to stop and talk. Here we go. Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab. So let me explain that phrase to you. So he's from Bethlehem in Judah. So Bethlehem's a city. You remember that name. That's, if you were around at Christmas time, that's where Jesus is born. So here's Bethlehem. It's in the south. And there's famine, so there's not enough food. So these people are going to go live in Moab. That's across the Dead Sea from there. Verse 2, the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. Don't name your kids this. It means weak and sickly. So if those of you are pregnant out there and you're like, hey, I don't know, I think I want to figure out kid names, Mahlon, Chilion. I know you like, maybe biblical names are cute, but weak and sickly, not exactly rocky. All right. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem and Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. Verse 3. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. Okay, 2 sons. Verse 4. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah. Here, interesting fact. You're looking at that and you're like, hey, I know that name. It's like Oprah, right? Just for fun, so you can know this. Oprah was supposed to be named Orpah, but they messed it up in the hospital, and now she's called Oprah rather than Orpah. How about that? Some of you are like, oh, the light's going on now. Thank you. This is what we learn at City View Church. Some other things too, hopefully, but there you go. And the name of the other was Ruth. They lived there about 10 years. And both Mahlon and Chilion, weak and sickly, died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. All right, so that's a pretty awesome day for her, right? So her husband Elimelech, they've moved from their country, the people they know. They move from their country, the people they know, and they go across the Dead Sea to a country and group of people who they don't know, but where the economy might be slightly better. So they move across the Dead Sea, and now they're over here. They go husband, wife, Naomi, Elimelech, Mahlon, Chilion. Hey, we're going to go over here and we're going to live. Shortly after they get there, Elimelech dies, gone. Now she's got 2 sons, probably teenagers, and after a while, these 2 sons take wives. They take wives, they live there 10 years, and then, oh, this is awesome, both sons die. Now mom has 2 daughters-in-law and no hope for support. Jason, what do you mean? She can't work? No, she can't work. We're not living in 21st century America. We're living in about 1500 BC. And you're dealing with an economy that is solely based on men working. This woman has lost her husband, which is how she would have survived at first. Then it goes to her sons, so her sons would take care of her. Well, now her sons are dead. Now she has her mouth to feed and 2 wives' mouths to feed, and she is in utter terror, right? She's had a very, very, very bad day. I bet she would trade places with somebody on that roller coaster like that. Except back then, she would have seen that roller coaster and thought it was like some sort of crazy monster from the sea, probably. And this woman, Naomi, who her name means pleasantness, is struggling. When everything falls apart, what does your character show? When everything falls apart, what does your character show? When you're squeezed, what comes out? When you have everything go wrong, job's gone, creditors are calling, Car's broken, AC just went out. When you're squeezed and everything goes wrong, what comes out? What we're going to look at today is a contrast of two women who were squeezed. Naomi and her daughter-in-law Ruth. Naomi has lost her husband and her sons, but remember, Ruth is just in this exact same position. Ruth has lost her husband and has no sons. She is, essentially, they are in the same position. She is slightly younger than her mother-in-law. And you're dealing with two women who are struggling, two women who have lost everything, two women where everything has fallen apart. How do they respond? How do they respond in three separate areas? How do they respond when it comes to people? Look down in verse 6. Verse 6, when she arose with her daughters-in-law, this is Naomi, to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she hears things are going better in Israel. I'm going to go there. We're going to get food. So she set out from the place where she was with her two daughters-in-law, about to leave, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. They're heading back. But Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, go, return each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. And if you were to go a little bit further and skip down a few more verses, what you would see is that she is also, the daughters say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to follow you. We're going to come after you. We're going to come with you. We're not going to leave you alone. We're coming. And she says, no, don't. And Orpah kisses her and says goodbye, and Ruth does something different. What happens with Naomi when it comes to people, when she's squeezed, she pushes people away. What happens with Naomi when she's squeezed, when she's got nothing and she's in trouble and she's struggling? What happens with Naomi, negative response to what's gone on, what happens with Naomi is she pushes people away. She pushes out and she pushes them gone. Two women who care about her, she tells them to leave. What does Ruth do? Look at verse 14. I love this. So this is after the second time where Naomi's told them to go, and Ruth says this, and then they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, which means, hey, I'm leaving. But Ruth clung to her. So what happens to people? What does Ruth do? Well, Ruth clings. Ruth clings to them. You hear this thing, this word cling, and it sounds like, okay, well, so they're just going to keep going, right? Well, the idea of this word cling, it's the same word that's used in Genesis 1 and 2 when they're taught, when Adam and Eve are coming together, and Adam kind of has this revelation of, now this is now bone of my bone, this is flesh of my flesh. For this is the reason that men leave their mothers and they go and cling to their spouse. This is it. That's the idea of her loving this mother-in-law, is that I am going to cling. And just, hey, just maybe a little side there. Hey, young men out there, it's important for one day for you to leave the home and cling to a spouse, okay? I'm just saying, get out of your Star Wars pajamas, stop playing Xbox, get a job, and go get married, okay? Any amens? No? Okay, cool, all right. I don't have an Xbox, I've got a PlayStation 3. Yeah, Nintendo 64. It's time to be an adult, all right. Now you've gone from preaching to meddling, all right. So what's going on here is she says, I am going to cling to you deeply. I am not going to let go of you. I'm not going to walk away from you. I cling. This isn't like clingy, like gross, I don't want to be near you. Oh, you're annoying and you're frustrating. This is cling like you're pushing me away, but I'm just grabbing your hand and saying, sorry, no way. She clings. When it comes to people and you get squeezed, you either push people away or you cling close to them. You cling close to the ones you love. Second, look at the situation. When it comes to the situation, look at verse 12. Naomi says this, "Turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say, I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." She just says, hey, there's no hope. If I were to get married tonight, if I were to meet a man on the way on this road to Judah and he was awesome and loved me and proposed, got out the 5-carat diamond ring, put it on my finger, we got married tonight, somebody did the vows for us, I did that, and then I got pregnant tonight, whoa, that'd be crazy. Would you wait 18 years until this kid is of marrying age for you to marry him? I mean, realistically, the answer is no. You couldn't do that. You wouldn't do that. That doesn't make any sense. And so she's just saying, hey, there's no hope. Like, just get realistic here. Get realistic here, Orpah, Ruth. It's not going to happen. So what Naomi is Naomi is fatalistic. If you're going to write down notes, that's our next deal, is Naomi in this situation. I don't see any hope. Like, I'm going from this place, my husband's dead, my kids are dead, we're going to go back to the land I'm from, where maybe I can beg for food there, maybe I can be okay there, maybe I can survive there. I'm not sure about the rest of you guys surviving there. I'm going to take care of myself. You guys go back. There's no hope for you if you come with me. There might be a little hope if you stay here. I love what Ruth says. Look at this. Verse 15, she said, this is Naomi, she said, "Your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you." And all right, so a lot of people, I do a lot of weddings, and when I do a lot of weddings, a lot of people like to have this thing read, which is beautiful. But they don't usually realize this is like a daughter-in-law to her mother-in-law. So I like to instruct daughters-in-law, hey, say this to your mother-in-law rather than to your husband. No one's taking me up on that yet. All right. She says this, "Do not leave me, do not urge me to do that. For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge." Like, can you imagine saying that to your mother-in-law? Seriously? I don't know. "Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." So while Naomi is fatalistic, Ruth is faithful. While Naomi is fatalistic, there's no hope. Ruth says, no. You can tell me to leave. I'm not going to leave. You can tell me to go. I'm not going to go. I am here. If we die on this road to Judah, highly likely at this time in a travel, 2 women traveling by themselves, if we die on this road, I'm going to die with you. And wherever you end up stopping, I'm going to stop with you. I'm not leaving you. I'm not walking away from you. I'm going to be faithful to you. This lady, she's faithful. She's not leaving. She's in this. She's committed to Naomi. And don't miss this too. She's committed to God. What's the root of her saying that I am going to do this? I'm going to stay with you. She says, the Lord. If I don't do this, let the Lord punish me. If I don't do this, let the Lord be upon me. We'll come back to that in a minute. But Naomi is fatalistic and Ruth is faithful. When you're squeezed, when everything falls apart and everything is wrong and nothing goes right, where are you going to land? Fatalistic or faithful? Number 3. What about your personal perspective? Look at verse 19. So they've made this travel back. I love what Naomi says. It says, Naomi realized she couldn't change Ruth's mind, and so she just let her come. Verse 19, so the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the woman said, is this Naomi? So they get to the hometown and they say, hey, I recognize her. Is that Naomi? Yeah, it is. Good job, kids. She said to them, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara. All right, let's do a little word study. The word Mara means bitter. Naomi, remember what that means? I told you earlier. Naomi means pleasantness. She's gone from pleasantness to call me Mara. I'm bitter. All right. Now, I'm sure some of us might have mother-in-laws who are like, yeah, she's Mara. But she's just being accurate. She's being self-aware of where her heart is. Naomi is bitter. And did you see that next thing? That next part of that verse there? Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. Throughout this whole chapter, if you read it, I would want you to go home and read Ruth 1. Throughout this whole chapter, the word for God, the name for God, is in all caps in your Old Testament. That's translating Yahweh. That's the personal name of God. That's, hey, I've got a personal relationship with God, and this is how I speak about him. Well, when Naomi changes her name to Mara, she doesn't call him Yahweh. She doesn't talk about a personal relationship with God. She doesn't talk about, hey, I know him. Hey, he loves me. Hey, he cares for me. She says, the Almighty. The man upstairs just doesn't care. God, that guy, him, he's left me out to dry. You're not dealing just with a woman who's bitter about life's circumstances. You're dealing with a woman who is bitter about life's circumstances, but is putting the blame on God. She turns very, very bitter. Hey, everybody who recognizes me from before. Remember when I had a husband, 2 kids, I was here. Guess what? I left. Everybody died except for my daughters-in-law. One left me. The one that is with me, she just won't leave me alone. And now we're here. Call me Mara. I'm bitter. Life is bad. Has everything ever fallen apart for you? Have things just unraveled and gone crazy? You lost your home, you lost your savings, you lost your stuff, you lost your job. You have no more money, you've got no more stuff. It seems like everybody's walked out on you, and you're bitter. I think if we're honest, and I know we're in church, so sometimes we do that and sometimes we don't. I think if we're honest, we've all been here. If we're honest, we've all sat where we were Naomi. Now we're Mara. We were pleasant, and now we're bitter. The New Testament has something to say about this, is that when this bitterness thing kind of comes in, what it does is, and what the writer of Hebrews says is, beware the root of bitterness that comes in, and when it grows up, it defiles many. When bitterness enters a life, when bitterness enters a community, when bitterness enters a relationship, a family, what ends up happening is it grows up there, and then, like an unseen cancer with its tentacles all over the body, it starts to destroy. And bitterness breaks people down. Let's contrast it with Ruth. What does Ruth do? Look at chapter 2. Chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. So they've made this journey back. and they aren't moving back. We think you move into a house, you move into a nice place. I mean, they're not moving back into a house. They might move back to something that was family land, something where they might have some claim on. But when they left, they pretty much gave that up. So what they're really doing is they're kind of sojourning. They're trying to just survive on the land, and they're living in probably a makeshift tent. And so these two women have come back. They're living in some little bit of a tent. Now, Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." So here's what happens. They come back. They are now there. And Naomi is staying in the tent, bitter. And Ruth is going out to work, determined. So while Naomi faces these circumstances and is bitter, I'm angry about what life's thrown at me. I'm done. I hate everything. I hate everybody. I'm just going to lay here and sleep. Ruth comes back and says, we got to get to work. She's got a determined heart, a determined focus. What's your personal perspective? When you get squeezed, what happens? When you get pushed, what happens? When everything in your life goes wrong, what happens? What happens? Where do you go? Do you get bitter? Or do you get determined? Now, we've taken all the notes, we filled in all the blanks, and we have 20 minutes left. Yeah, exactly. I've got more to say. I just wanted you to put the papers down. Where do you default to? A few weeks ago, Easter Sunday even, we got done here. Great service here. We worshiped together. Highest attendance. At that time, one of the best giving Sundays we ever had. It was a great day. People got saved. It was fantastic. Awesome Easter Sunday. Oh, best one we've ever had. We've had two. Go home. We rest a little bit. We're going to go have dinner with my parents. We're pumped. We're excited. My kids are going to have an Easter egg hunt. We're going to eat some great food that we didn't have to prepare. We're going to have dishes there that we aren't going to have to clean. We're just going to get to go there, have fun, enjoy, and leave. Oh, awesome. Pile everybody in the car. Not as awesome. But we get them in the car and everything's good. Put the key in the ignition. Turn. Nothing. Nothing. Like not even a turnover, not even electricity going on in the car. I've never seen anything like this. I don't know what to do. This is really frustrating. Okay, so, and you know what happens right when that's going on? You start getting phone calls. Like right in the middle of the frustration. I'm really frustrated personally. Now everybody's going to start calling. Hey, I've got a thing. I need your help. Here's a text. And there's 19 people trying to get a hold of me while I'm trying to figure out why won't my car start. And then you get text messages. And then my mom calls. I love my mom. She says, "Jason, you're late. What are you doing? Where are you at? When are you going to be here?" "Well, my car won't start." And then that starts like, "Well, what's wrong with your car?" "I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out. Come on." And trying to turn this car on, they're finally like, just get in the other car. Praise the Lord, we've got two. Throw everybody in the back seat. There's hardly any room, so they're all complaining. Everything's horrible. He's touching me. He touched me. He threw something at me. He bit me. He licked me. You know how it goes. Maybe you don't. Maybe your kids are nicer. And so they're all back there, and we're going, and come back, and then you just got, and I know I'm going to have to deal with this when I get home. And so didn't really enjoy dinner. Didn't really enjoy that time. I was squeezed. I was kind of bitter. And maybe I'm the only one. Maybe you're there too. We get squeezed, we get upset, things go wrong, everything goes bad, and we default to Mara. We default to be Naomi. We default there. Why do we default there? Ever wonder why we default there? I mean, I know some people are more predisposed to be optimists. They're silly. I'm just kidding. They're a blessing. Some would say you're a pessimist. No, I just say I'm a realist. But in the end, even the optimists, things go wrong for them, they get squeezed. They're always optimistic about other people's issues, but never their own. And so that just makes them even more annoying. I love you, optimists. Keep being there. And we get squeezed and we default. Why do we default there? There's something at root within us. There's something at root within us. Something at root in all of us. Something that David dealt with when he was talking. He said, in sin my mother conceived me, not that what they did to have him was sin, but that when he was conceived, sin was in him. Like, that we are all have this thing on the inside of us called a sin nature, and that sin nature is always pushing its way out. Why do we default here? We default here because what we've got on the inside is this sin thing. Unless we are carefully guarding, carefully pushing in, carefully loving the Lord in the middle of the trial, carefully realizing the purpose of the Lord in the middle of the thing, in the middle of when everything falls apart, unless we're carefully seeing that, we're going to be Naomi. We're going to be Mara. I told you we'd come back to this. What strengthens Ruth in the middle of this thing? Look back at verse 18. Look back at verse 18. I'm sorry, verse 17. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. So pleasant. May the Lord do so to me and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. So before Ruth says, Ruth's going to cling to her. I'm not going to let go of you. Here's my devotion to you. Hey, Naomi, I'm clinging to you. I'm devoted to you. I'm not letting go of you. This is her saying, I am devoted, I am clinging, I am faithful, I'm that, not because of who you are, Naomi, not because of who I am, Ruth, but because of who the Lord is. Her strength, her power, her ability to be this woman who is faithful and true and clinging and strength-filled and determined, her ability to be this woman is not based on her own character where she can somehow grin and bear it and white-knuckle it until everything's better. No, her devotion, her ability to do this is based on who the Lord is and her relationship with Him. So at the center of her ability to be someone who clings in the middle of harsh circumstance, at the center of her ability to be faithful when no one would want to be faithful, at the center of her ability to be determined when everyone else would give up and lay in the tent and be sad, at the center of that ability is the Lord, is Yahweh. So how do we do this? Short answer, you can't. Oh, well, now I feel bitter and Mara. Thanks, Jay. You can't on your own. You can't on your own. And Ruth would say the same thing. You can't on your own. You can only do it through Jesus. You can only do it through personal God who wants a personal relationship with people who are afar off. You can only do it via the gospel. You can only do it via the one who was sent, who came and who died and who rose again. Ruth was saved by looking forward to what was coming, by a personal relationship with the real God that was coming. We are saved by a personal relationship with the God who came. And the way that we live in these bitter, difficult circumstances, in these hard and obscene times, the way we deal with it is by clinging to Jesus. This is what we mean when we talk about the gospel being the center of our lives. This is the thing where when everything goes crazy and we're squeezed and we're tempted to be bitter, that we're able to be better, not by ourselves or our own salt, but by the one who saved us. The gospel empowers this. The gospel empowers this. The gospel empowers Ruth. We'll get to a little bit of Ruth's biography, or futurography, I guess, in weeks to come. But she's the grandmother, great-grandmother, sorry if I get that wrong, of David. David the king. David and Goliath, you know the story. You've read the Malcolm Gladwell book. She's related there. She who was far off. Remember what country she's from? She's a Moabite. She has no business being in the camp of Israel, but she's been brought in, and she becomes the grandmother of the king of Israel. This woman, who was far off, is brought in by the personal God, by the one who loves her. And for you who might be far off, far from God, far from who he is, have never met him, have never had relationship with him, or maybe you've only seen him in relation to religious people who call themselves Christians. This is the personal God who calls people who are far off into relationship with him, who calls religious people who are just as far off into relationship with him. That by this, they can live in joy and peace, regardless of circumstance, when everything falls apart. Pray with me. Life is really, really, really hard, God. And things go really, really wrong sometimes. And when things go wrong, we're tempted to go back to our sin and go back to the thing that we were in and live there and dwell there. But it's only by you calling us out of that through relationship with your Son. It's only by us continually remembering the gospel in the middle of that, by the goodness of your Son, and by the conviction of the Spirit, that we are able to look like Ruth in these circumstances. So God, in a way, I'm thankful that we can't do this so that we can cling to you and say, you can. God, I pray for people here who are struggling, who have never met Jesus and are coming to the end of themselves and realizing, I can't do this. I can't fix my issues. I just can't even breathe. It's so hard. Lord, I pray that they'd come to Jesus and find rest for their weary soul. Lord, I pray that before they leave today, they'd grab a prayer partner that'll be on the way out. Lord, they'd grab one and say, hey, I need this Jesus. God, I pray for the believer who struggles hard in the middle of things falling apart. But I pray that they'd cling to you in the middle of that. And they'd confess that they don't have an answer for it, but that they have a God in the middle of it. Pray that we'd love your gospel. And that when we're squeezed, our bitterness and our anger wouldn't come out, but our love for you. Lord, as we worship some more, let our hearts be filled with what you've done for us, how you've made a way for us. Lord, thank you for your grace and thank you for your goodness. In Jesus' name, amen.